If your cool season crops bolt, get leggy, or never take off, you're probably messing up one of these three things: timing, depth, and temperature. I've made every one of these mistakes in my own garden. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how I start broccoli, 4 types of lettuce, chervil, mustard tender greens, and 4 types of spinach. The synthetic freeway, so you get short, stocky, productive plants and not disappointing trays. Start with your seed starting mix of choice. Now, there are a few things that I take into consideration when it comes to seed starting, but we use a Fox Farm Happy Frog that we run through a sift. I actually have been using the kids' sand toy for the beach, and it works swimmingly. You're going to want to sift out all the big chunks. Sometimes I add extra worm castings to it. Sometimes I add extra perlite to it. Depends on the plant specifically. All of that gets sifted as well because you want a light, fluffy mix when it comes to seed starting. Then you want to sanitize that seed starting mix. What I like to do is throw the soil in a couple of cake pans and throw them in the oven. I typically run it at 200, but if I'm in a hurry like today, I'm at 350. We're going to hold that temperature at 180 degrees for 30 minutes, and that should eliminate most pests, weed seed, anything. It's actually done. Now that the temp spike's shut off and not screaming so loud we can't hear or think to ourselves, we're going to leave our soil in the oven for around about 30 minutes. Just let it cool down to a point where you can actually handle it. That temp spike is amazing. If you don't have one, check them out. Now, when it comes to pre-moistening your seed starting mix before you put the seeds in it, you're going to want to moisten it to the point where it's like a wrung out sponge. You can squeeze it, but just barely a drop of water you can feel is getting ready to come out of it. That's about where you want to be. Now, when I do my seed starting mix, what I'll actually do is I'll add water to the bottom of it, and then I'll fill my tray, and then I'll mist over the top of it as I'm going. And that typically gives me right about the right consistency that I want for seed starting. I like doing the dry seed starting mix into the trays because that removes all air pockets as you're packing them down with the water. If you're wanting a little extra nutrition, you can actually add a little bit of worm castings to the top. What we do is we just add the worm castings right into there. And your Fox Farm Happy Frog already has worm castings, forest debris, however you want to go about it. It actually has most of the nutrition that you're actually going to need for your plants for seed starting from the beginning. But seeds already come pre-packed with everything they need to be germinated. You could legit take a seed, put it straight into some coconut coir. It's going to go. Once it starts getting its true leaves, that's when you're going to want to start fertilizing. Second set of true leaves. Leggy seedlings are almost always going to be caused by a light situation. There are a few other issues that could be causing it. Heat mat, leaving the humidity dome on, but we'll discuss those later. Once your seeds sprout, they're going to need about 14 to 16 hours of light a day. Now, we have a setup. I get up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, turn the lights on, and they run until about 9 to 11 o'clock at night, depending on what time I turned them on in the morning. You can buy a timer that'll automate this and make it a lot simpler. We just have not done that yet. I probably need to. Now, you're going to want to keep your lights close. Typically, with a regular shop light, if you just picked them up at Walmart, Rural King, you're wanting 2 to 4 inches. For high-powered LEDs like we have, I'll put a link in the description down below. They work great. I've been using them for the last 5 years, and they're phenomenal, and they link interchangeable. I did a whole video on it of my seed starting setup. I'll put the card up above so you can check that out if you want to. These ones, I normally keep them about 4 to 6 inches because they do, in fact, burn plants pretty quickly if they're too close. You can also get a meter and read all that, but we'll talk about that in a different video. You're going to want to move your lights up as the plants grow, and I covered all that in the seed starting setup as well. If your seedlings start looking like they're stretching or reaching for the light, or they start falling over, that's your cue that you need to be getting those lights closer because they're actually getting leggy instead of growing strong and sturdy plants. The next big killer is, of course, going to be overwatering and dampening off disease. You want your mix consistently moist, not sopping wet, but not bone dry. I bottom water almost everything. If you've ever watched any of my videos, that's pretty much how I do everything all the time. I just pour water into the tray, let the soil wick it up, give it about 15-20 minutes, and I dump the excess off. That's going to keep the surface just a little bit drier and make it just a little bit harder for fungal diseases, fungus gnats, to live in those top few inches of soil. If you've ever seen a seedling that one day looks just fine, the next day it looks like it was pinched off at the base and flopped over laying in the seed cell, that's dampening off disease. Pull it, reduce watering, get some airflow going around the other ones. Something you can do if you catch the dampening off before it breaks over is I've actually taken a little bit of dirt and put it around the base of the plant to hold it up straight, watered it in, then left it, and it actually grew roots from above the dampening off point and kept its roots from the below point. I'm not saying it'll work every time, but it can save some of your plants. Another option is, of course, using a hydrogen peroxide solution to kill the fungus. And the other thing to know with dampening off disease is even though you have a sprout, dampening off disease doesn't always just affect sprouts. Sometimes you'll get dampening off disease while it's still a seed and they'll never sprout. You'll just think it's a failed germination. What it does is the same thing. It attacks that seedling, pinches it off below the ground, and you'll never even know it happened. And of course, our last global rule is label and timing. Every tray gets a label that has the type of crop, variety, and the time that I started the seed. 6 weeks from now, you're probably not going to remember what was in each tray, what variety it was, and what date you planted it. Just believe me when I say that I've made this mistake before, and guessing as you're trying to transplant really causes a mess. For timing, everything in this video is going to be based off your last frost date. What we're going to do is we're going to look up your last frost date, and then we're going to count backwards from that day to give you a good idea of when to start those specific seeds. Let's get into the fun part where I show you exactly how I handle each crop. Broccoli is one of my must-grow cool season crops, and it does best started indoors. We're actually going to be testing that later on in the season because when we go to transplant, I'm going to actually direct sow some broccoli to see if we can succession sow broccoli into later spring. I want to really nail down exactly when I can get away with transplanting broccoli as well. Start broccoli about 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost date. We always go with 6 and then write it down specifically in our log or on the calendar. So that way, if it seems like it's getting more root wrapped, we can bring it back a week. Or if we think we could get a little bit more out of it, we started a week earlier the following year. Right now, it's about, I think 6 weeks is exactly where we're at right now. Next season, I'm going to try 7. You can fill your seed cells with a pre-moistened seed mix, or you can do like I do and fill them with a dry seed mix, bottom water, spray as you go. Either way, you're going to want to gently firm them down. That way you don't have air pockets, because if roots hit air pockets, they like cringe, burn, however you want to say it, and they die. And it'll actually kill a seedling if it's their first initial taproot. Broccoli is going to want to be 1/4 to a 1/2 inch deep. I normally drop 2 seeds per cell. Cover lightly and gently firm the surface. Then we'll give them a good mist with the new pump-up sprayer. If you're still using a hand sprayer, try a pump-up sprayer. They are freaking amazing, especially if you're doing close to 500-600 seedlings. Just saying. You're going to want to keep the tray between 70 and 75 degrees for the fastest germination. Mine will be underneath the grow lights the whole time, but if you've got a spot where you can limit their light, that's fine too. You're going to want to drop the temperature once they sprout to about 60 degrees. I know that's going to be hard, especially if you're doing an indoor setup like mine. We just keep the house about 70 and they seem to do fine. When each cell has 2 seedlings, let them grow until you can see clearly which one is stronger. Then you're going to want to clip it at the soil level. Don't pull it, because if you pull it, you're going to tear up the other one's roots and possibly actually damage the other one's stem, and that's going to be catastrophic. They're ready to transplant when they're 4 to 6 inches tall. Have a couple sets of tree leaves, and your outdoor soil is workable. For us, that's looking like the 27th and 28th. Hopefully I'll be putting out a bed prep video. When it comes to transplanting anything, a week before you go to transplant, go ahead, go out there, and if you have to till, add your compost layer. That way when it comes to transplanting day, you can just punch holes, water in, and move on to the next one. Seems to save us a lot of time instead of trying to do 100 plants plus bed prep at the same time. Lettuce is really flexible. You can start it indoors like this, or you can direct sow it. We like to do both. I like to get the plugs in the ground for proper spacing in the beginning, and then I like to direct sow some seeds in between, so that way we have a continuous harvest every 2 weeks. We did a whole video on succession sowing. It's in our 2026 garden game plan playlist. For starting indoors, you're going to want to sow these 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost date. Lettuce seeds don't like to be buried deeply, so a 1/4 inch is more than enough, and some varieties even enjoy being surface sowed because they need light to germinate. I sprinkle a few seeds on the surface, then I'll barely cover them, and then gently push them in, and then we'll go ahead and mist them in. Once they've sprouted, go ahead and make sure you keep them cool, because high heat is what's going to make lettuce bolt the fastest. For succession planting, think in 1 to 3 week waves. Instead of doing one giant sowing, do multiple sowings of smaller trays every couple of weeks. So that way you don't end up with a large amount of lettuce all at once that nobody's going to be able to eat in that time frame. You can transplant them when they're a few inches tall, or you can direct sow them 3 to 4 weeks before your last frost date. Then you can thin them to the spacing you need. Now with some of these varieties like the black-seeded Simpson, it's a cut and come again. We sow those pretty thick. Butter Crunch, Burpee Bib, and Iceberg is all heading lettuce. You're going to want to follow some form of spacing there. You want 8 inches between plants, but if you don't want a massive head that's 8 inches across, you can get by with planting them at 4 inches, because once they start hitting each other, they'll kind of slow down their growth, and then you can pop that head out in between and move down the row, and then those ones have 8 inches to continue growing outward. Spinach loves the cold. This will be one we always direct sow, but we do like to start plugs indoors, so that way we can get a little bit of jump start on the season, and then we'll do a fall garden on it. Outdoors, you can usually sow spinach 3 to 4 weeks before your last frost date, even sooner if you don't mind slower germination or the ground isn't frozen. Fingers crossed for the 27th and the 28th. You're going to make a shallow furrow that's about a 1/2 inch deep. We're going to space the seeds a couple inches apart, cover them, and water them in. We're going to do the same thing in the seed starting cells. We're going to punch a hole about a 1/2 inch deep. We're going to pop our seed in there. I'm only going to do one because spinach seeds are pretty big, plus growing 4 different varieties. We don't really need 24 spinach plants to keep the whole household going. We do have a lot of upcoming videos that we're going to make about how we preserve spinach, and probably an awesome smoothie video, because I need to get back into that. Get a little fat for the wintertime. Spinach germinates best in cool soil and actually struggles when things start to warm up a little bit. Now this year we did pick a couple of new varieties that are supposed to be heat and drought resistant. Definitely subscribe so you can see if that's actually a real thing or not, because there's only the water spinach that I know of that we can grow consistently all year long here, and it's not even a real spinach. It tastes like it, doesn't, but it is what it is. I don't like it. And if you're watching this in the late season and it's already starting to get probably 60s to 80s throughout the daytime, it might be best just to wait until fall to start spinach instead of trying to force it through a hot spring, because it's going to probably disappoint you pretty quickly. Once your spinach is up, if you didn't use the seed starting cells, you're going to want to thin them to 6 to 8 inches. That way they have plenty of room to make a lot of leaves. Like I said earlier, you can get away with 4 inches. The plant's just going to be a little bit more compact. And as you harvest, pick one plant, harvest off of it, leave the other one. That way you consistently have a good harvest week after week. Here is a staple for our household that goes along perfectly with our collard greens, and that is the mustard. We love mustard greens for soups and for cooking it with bacon in the big cast iron, cooking it down. Oh, it's good, well done. Mustard is super easy, super forgiving, and great for beginners. You can start it indoors 3 or so weeks before the last frost date, but we typically direct sow ours. We are going to start some in the plugs as usual, just so that way we have a little jump start on it. Plus we want them as quick as possible, and it's nice to have that succession sowing going into the garden. I like to do a quick scatter sow over the bed, Sprinkle the seeds over the surface, then gently rake them in. We also have been known to sprinkle a little bit of compost over the top. That way they're about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch deep, then water them in. These are going to be some really fast germinators, so they're probably going to pop up in just a few days. If you want full-size plants, go ahead and thin them out to about 3 inches. We do the plugs at 3-inch spacing as well. And with the starting of the plugs, you just 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch deep, lightly cover, water them in. But if you want them just for the baby greens, you can just let them pop up however they want to, and then just clip them as they come or as you want or need them. Chervil is a really underrated herb, and it fits beautifully into a synthetic-free, cool season garden. It likes cooler temps and a little bit of shade. Chervil doesn't enjoy being transplanted. It can be done, just doesn't super like it. We're going to actually try the plugs this year again and direct sow it about 2 weeks before our last frost date. And it's either going to be in a shadier area or tucked in amongst taller plants. We're going to have to see what's what at that point. We're going to make very shallow rows, and we're just going to scatter sow them again because they actually need light to germinate. We don't want to cover them deeply. Just a light dusting of soil will be more than enough. You're going to want to keep the soil consistently moist. Do not let them dry out because those little seeds are going to give up on you fast. Once they're up, thin out the plants to a few inches apart. And if you want, you can let a few of these actually go to seed, and they'll actually germinate and come up throughout the next cool season. We haven't had such luck because we've been battling the clay, which is what the whole bed prep video is about. It's how we're trying to improve the soil down there. A quick recap and a quick decision guide for you. Indoors 4 to 6 weeks before the last frost. Broccoli, lettuce. If you want transplant and a head start, if not, direct sowing is just fine before the last frost date. Direct sow into your prepped garden beds a few weeks before your last frost. Spinach, mustard, chervil. And lettuce again if you want to have a succession sowing. If your nights are still dipping below freezing and your soil is cold and soggy, lean harder on the transplants. As your nights warm up and your soil becomes workable, start leaning on direct sowing these cool season crops. If you drop your gardening zone or your last frost date down in the comments below, I'll help you tweak the timing for your specific area. And if you want to see how I prepare these beds without a single synthetic input, I'll link that video right here on the screen and down in the description. Thanks for hanging out in the garden with me, and I'll see you in the next one.